Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time. We're continuing Winter's Heart together today. That will be chapters 15, 16 to 25. Don't ask me about names of those because I'm a bit confused today. So yeah, if my voice is still fucked, it seems I caught the COVID. I did a test today, I'll do another one tomorrow, and I will know more. So I figured I'll record this today in case I'll be all knocked out tomorrow and you still have something to watch, which, wouldn't that be nice? All right, but that's enough from me for now. For that, let's go with the actual book that we want to talk about. Oh, cheers. All right. So we basically have two plot lines today to talk about. That is mostly what's going down in Ebudar with Matt and other people, and then we have a bit of a plot line that's Rand and Min and Cadwayne and other people all showing up in... Oh god, I forgot the name of the city already, because who cares? That place where Cadwayne and Varen and others are born, it's a city. And I can't remember the name right now, which, doesn't matter, really. And overall, plotline-wise, this is still pretty fun. It's probably some of the most fun parts that I've read so far in Winter's Heart, and that's mostly due to Matt. Don't worry, there's still annoying crap, but we'll talk about all of it now. So, let's first start with the whole Matt situation. Matt, as we said, like yesterday, is hanging around, trying to leave a very specific relationship that is kind of weird, and also trying to get, to grips with the situation in Ebudar under the Shanchan. All the while, slowly meeting the Daughter of the Nine Moons, which is also happening at the same time. And there's, just like regular adventures going down. And that's why I think this part is actually mostly cool. As I said, there's still like a lot of problematic shit going down because Robert Jordan can't help being problematic, but overall, Matt going down back into the city, being attacked by the Golem again, being then sort of employed to smuggle out one of the Aes Sedai out of the city, and then also getting himself into the problem of, how to maybe free another one of the Aes Sedai that was caught and made like one of those animal slaves. The Domani was made a Domani. All of that is actually really cool and fun because Matt is a cool character. His idea of never wanting to get into trouble and getting into trouble all the time. It kind of reminds me a bit of Rincewind, the wizard, just that Matt actually, starts to fight and whatnot, and is not as consequent in his cowardice. Quite the opposite, obviously, at the end of the day, but, and all of that has, specifically because it is through Matt's point of view. It has a more light-hearted tone, and Robert Jordan, I've said this like a couple of times before, right? Robert Jordan is best when he's adopting a light-hearted tone. Now, obviously, because of Matt's supposed, horniness and all of that, it always has a bit of that, old man, slightly grimy humor to it. That is just because Robert Jordan, while horny all the time, is also extremely shy and prudish all the time. So we're still talking about cuddling and maybe kissing and the likes, when what it really is about is fucking. But Robert Jordan will never use that word, so I'm here to help him out with it. But if you don't mind that, if you don't mind the cringy salaciousness of Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, for example, as well, in later books at least. If you're okay with that specific way of looking at sexuality that is very much male gazy, but also at the same time very much, cringy in its like, I wanna be kind of raunchy here, but I can't actually bring myself to because I'm also a bit too prudish myself. If you can like ignore that bit of it, it makes for a fun read. Matt getting in all these like troubles and stuff. Yes, him having this issue with like being put in pink ribbons. I don't know. It's the kind of thing that doesn't really age that well, because while it is supposedly mostly Matt that is uncomfortable being put into like pink clothes because they're obviously a girl's clothes, as we know. At the same time, it is very much clear that we are supposed to find it funny that Matt has to endure this. And it's very much a joke on his expense because a man wearing pink, ha ha ha. You know what I mean? That's the casual like slightly toxic masculinity of Wheel of Time that is there because, yeah, the humor of Matt being, in a relationship with the Queen of Ebudar, who is basically kind of abusing him, and it's a complex situation there, because on the one hand, she's clearly using her power to force Matt into that relationship. But at the same time, it is also made very clear that, like, secretly, Matt is actually kind of enjoying it. And we're supposed to find it funny that he has to deal with a dominant woman. And I see, that's sort of like where I see the problem with that. It's like, if Matt is more like, cool, I'm fucking the queen. It's all fun and games, and I made that decision. It's like if Matt had a choice, and there's no choice for him, he's just like basically forced into it. And then the problem that we have with it, or what we're supposed to find funny about it, is not the fact, or like be pissed off about, or whatever. The problem that we should see, or Robert Jordan seems to see with this like arrangement, is not that it's, lack of consent. It's more, Matt is a bit ashamed of being, treated less than the dominant person in that relationship in public. And isn't that funny? Because now we're making jokes at the expense of his masculinity. And that's kind of, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, it's definitely something that you've seen in like older comedies a lot. The idea of, emasculating men for fun or as a way of humor is not something that Robert Jordan came up with. It just feels a bit ham-fisted because Robert Jordan, as I've said before, is not exactly a master of subtlety and nuance. Just doesn't get this across. And that's certainly something that we see here. Apart from that, but, as I said before, the adventure parts seem cool. He's running around in that city trying to get all these new jobs done, like, smuggling that woman out of town, freeing one of the Damani. Then there's like another plot line that will definitely combine tomorrow, I guess, and that is at Aegianan. Remember her from all the way back at the beginning of, I think, The Shadow Rising? Yeah, it must be Shadow Rising. Yes, in the Shadow Rising, right? The one left behind rebel, not really rebel, but whatever, Shan-Chan, who hooked up with Bail Daman, our like favorite cookie cutter pirate captain. Yeah, she's back on the board, and apparently she got, they got boarded when their job was to actually drop overboard those very special things to color and control, Randall Thor. So as I promised back in the day, we knew these things will not be lost. They will be taken by someone. Seems they're now taken by Lady Suroth, who is probably going to use them against Rand. And we just know it's sort of your Chekhov's gun kind of thing. It's like you put that kind of like magic item on the table, it'll be used at some point, and Rand will get colored by that thing at some point in the next 1, 2, 3 books, and then he'll free himself and all of that. It'll happen. We already know that, and at this point, the question is not so much like that it will happen or if it will happen. The question is more, will Robert Jordan find a halfway decent or halfway interesting plotline or way to make it happen? It's a bit that whole it's a trick, but you want to see the trick well done. And I don't really mind the fact that there's these kind of plot twists are oftentimes easy to foresee for the future. Which kind of makes them less of a plot twist. It's more like I want to see how he does it, because this is formulaic as fuck, but a formula well done is something that I'm fine with, right? I don't mind the formula. I want to see it executed well, and that's definitely something that Robert Jordan is so far often failing at. Will he maybe get better at it? Maybe. He's got 20 years of practice at this point, so maybe he kind of figured it out, but we'll see. Anyway, they're back, and they're trying to also leave the city or get out of it all in some way or other, and Bale has already recognized Matt, so he'll try to enlist Matt, and so we'll get Matt, what's his name, Tom Marilyn, all of that gang probably fleeing on a boat, maybe, we will find out in the future. So this is a lot of setup, but it's mostly okay done setup. We already see that there's some fascination going on with Tuan, whatever her full name is, daughter of the Nine Moons, and she's already fascinated with Matt. We needed this. Now, I don't know, the whole dice rolling in his head. I think it's a super unnecessary gimmick. I'll just say it this way. I think it's a super unnecessary gimmick because all it does is make it very clear for us, the reader, that something important is going to happen. It's yeah, right, I get it. We'll see. But it is what it is, so I'm not going to complain too much about it because, as I said, on the whole, it's fairly solid and decent. There's one or two things, however, that we need to talk about further. One of them is a smaller one, and that is the whole the Aegianan Bail Domon kind of relationship. And I think it will lead to a larger thing in the future, and that's about cultural superiority. Because what we find out is obviously that for some reasons, Bail Domon is her slave at this point. They got caught. She kind of managed to sort all that stuff out, but he got put up for auction as a slave because he got caught, and that's what Shan Chan do. They hold slaves, which, what? One interesting thing is that Robert Jordan, just for some reason, really needs to use all these weird different fantasy words instead of just calling them slaves, which will probably drive the point home better. But, we already spoke about the fact that he needs to use all kinds of invented words for the Shanshan to make them look more, exotic and everything. So, what's my point here? Where do I want to go with this? My problem is that we get that chapter, Question of Treason, I think, is the one, something like that, from Aegianan's point of view. And we'll leave aside all the improbabilities that lead everyone back here because, whatever, it's a story, it's a made-up story and all of that crap. No, we get all of that from Aegianan's point of view, and this is where I see the problem. And Aegianan is always conflicted about how, about her customs, and he's obviously, Bail Domon is her slave and has to follow specific rules and all of that. And he certainly doesn't do that. And it's very clear that through his, honest Western masculinity, because it's very clear that he's, not Shan Chen, he's from this continent, whichever name that place actually has. Through his, honest, upstanding, just ignoring those customs and whatnot, he absolutely kind of draws her in, and she's questioning all of her, upbringing and all of that stuff. through his honest, upstanding, and so forth attitude and masculinity. His big hands, his strong hands, and all of that stuff, right? And unfortunately, that once again falls into one of these weird, like, Orientalist cultural superiority kind of narratives, just spiced up with that whole like masculine power fantasy kind of thing in it as well. And that is that, like, the whole idea, or like a large idea behind a lot of this Orientalist viewpoints, is that you look at this other place, in this case Shanchan, and you see they're like powerful and all of that, but they are held back by their like traditions, which are fundamentally worse than our like Western traditions. And we can, make them even better soldiers when led by white officers. We need to organize their country because otherwise, you get all of that stuff, right? But we also can totally make them ours if we just use our strong Western, masculinity to save the individual Oriental woman, and bring them to our like viewpoint through dick magic. Whether that is something that you see in the what's it called, People of the Black Circle by Robert E. Howard, where you have a very similar setup, where Conan is that barbarian that is that actually abducting Princess Jasmina, one of those this like pseudo Indian princess and all of that, and she just like I have to go back to my customs and whatnot, but truly I just like rather hang out with you, barbarian, because of your. And Robert E. Howard is brutal in that regard, because he's not afraid to use the word Aryan there, but it's the same kind of narrative. You go back to like German weird Oriental fantasy, like not even German, like generally 19th century Orientalist fantasy, Orientalist fiction. That motive of the white man basically bringing freedom, democracy, and all of these other Western attributes basically to Oriental women by the power of their, well, not to put too fine a point on it, their dicks, is it's always there. And once again, it shows that problem that we have with the entirety of Wheel of Time, is that Robert Jordan is unquestioningly just like using a lot of these narrative, of these like individual smaller bits and pieces of narratives, and is putting them in there unquestioning. It's the same thing like as we've seen in like in the first book with Aram. Basically, he has to be that like tinker with his like swarthy masculinity, seducing our white women. That's a trope, a stereotype that has all kinds of harmful consequences. So has the white man saving the Oriental woman by dick power stereotype. It's something that has been around in fiction and propaganda. Literally propaganda, and also in just like fiction, depending on what time we're in right now. It has been around for centuries, and Robert Jordan is just like unquestioningly putting these bits and pieces into his story. And that's something that I find, think is important to point out, to be aware of these like patterns of thoughts and narratives that he's using there. And yeah, it's I don't know, it's a shame, because otherwise it's already a really cool story, and it has a lot of potential there. All right. Then we obviously have that weird situation with Oliver we need to talk about. The boy who is something of a rogue and exceedingly ugly, as we get told every single time. Also in the same, like, remember what I said earlier about like how Robert Jordan seems to reuse the same kind of formulation, ways of saying something, same form of expression to describe the same kind of things again and again, and it feels like he's literally copy pasting them back in. Oliver has one of those as well. He'd never be beautiful with that too wide mouth and the ears to match. It's literally the same fucking sentence, I promise you. You can go back and text search for too wide mouth and ears to match, or and the ears to match. You could look that up. It will show up in every single book that poor boy shows up in. Every single fucking time. Anyway, the fact that a 10-year-old boy is apparently all like just all about like the boobs is, I don't know, kind of creepy in a way, because apparently he's also getting away with it. And I'm always like wondering, why do we need that in there? It's not something that, is a huge problem, but I find it kind of weird. Like, grown-ass men write stories in which 10-year-old boys not only look at, boobs, which 10-year-old boys tend to do, because depending on where you are and whatnot, 10-year-old boys discover boobs, and they're like, wow. But why do you write the kind of power fantasy where the 10-year-old boy not only says, wow, boobs, and then goes home and does whatever, or watches porn on the internet secretly, but actually gets to touch boobs? And I'm like, why is that a thing? Why do we have to do that? It's not really, necessary for the story in any way. It does not drive the narrative. It is a detail that you put in there just for your own weird, gratuitous fantasy. And yes, it is just as much a problem if a very young boy has, gets into like any form of pseudo-sexual interaction with an older woman than it would be the other way around. And it would be way creepier, like more people would probably call it out as way creepier if it were the other way around. But we get it here with Oliver every single time. Like, yeah. It just feels unnecessary. And just through that, like, gratuitous was like, why do you put that in there, Bobby J, unless you really wanted to write about a 10-year-old boy getting to touch boobs? Yeah. All right. What we also need to talk about, obviously, is the Damani situation. And I don't really know what else I should talk about. I mean, yes, it's very clear that you could read this as a metaphor where people with a specific ability or that are physically or in some way different are treated as less than human, or less, are treated as inhuman or dehumanized. And yeah, that's something that has happened, something that has happened in all kinds of ways. It has happened with people with mental health or physical disabilities. It has happened with people just with different skin colors. You read some of that racist crap from like chattel slavery from like the 18th, 19th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. That's exactly what you get there. People are treated like less than human. But the problem is that we obviously only have women doing this here. And then because of like the way with the collar and everything, and the way they are treated as literal animals and pets, it gets that weird sexual connotation to it, where it feels more like some lesbian bondage fantasy written by a man, very clearly, instead of like an actual interaction or like any thought of like how chattel slavery, how slavery has dehumanized the victims of slavery for centuries. It's like, no, what you do is you take that and then you fetishize it. That's a word, man. Then you fetishize it. That's, well, it's tasteless is what it is. Like, fetishizing slavery in that way, while still keeping enough allusions to actual racist motivated slavery in it. Or maybe not racist, but because it's obviously you can go, no, they're not a different race, but by people because of a different specific physical attribute. That's what you get there, and that's fucking tasteless to do that by fetishizing it into weird lesbian bondage fantasies. Yeah, don't do that. I mean, yeah, please don't. So these are like aspects of it that unfortunately are in there, and if you could like just if you would have just like drop the Oliver bits, tone down the whole like we use magic slaves, tone down the sexual component of that and stuff. It would actually improve this part of the novel. It would be a really fun, adventure story in what you might call an occupied city. You can write great stories about like how it is to survive in an occupied city under an occupation. Whether it's your like adventure stories in Nazi occupied Paris, your Finch by Jeff Vandermeer does a wonderful job of talking about like having your city occupied by this weird, slightly alien group of people. In this case, well, they're literal mushroom people, but you know what I mean. Point is, you could do all of these wonderful things, but instead, Robert Jordan goes for his like slightly prudish, slightly fetishy bondage fantasy. I don't know. But so far, it's still a good setup. We meet this new guy, this old guy, Noel Karen, who is now a buddy of Matt's and gang, and we'll see where that will lead in the future. I foresee fun adventures, running over rooftops, well, maybe not running, limping over rooftops, getting into all kinds of accidents, well, by accident and all of that stuff, over the next chapters, and I think that can be really fun because once the action gets like a bit higher, Robert Jordan has less time to get into all these like unnecessary stupidities, and this can be really fun. Also, incidentally, I'll just call it now. I think Oliver is Brigida's eternal lover, reborn just like way before her, because we know that he, like her lover, I forgot his name, got reborn earlier, and I think he's that guy. Just saying. We'll find out later in the books, I'm sure, but I think that's the one. All right, let's look at the other bit. Rand has gone to that something faring city. I just keep forgetting the name, and it doesn't really matter. And he's gone there for a bit of a duel, I guess, to take out his rebel, what are they called? Rebel Asherman that tried to kill him in Kyrian. And the clever bit is that in that city, men cannot really easily channel, or will be caught when they channel, because of some ter'angreal kind of thing. Apparently they can't channel, but still, it's a bit weird. But that's how he's like sort of there, and then we get like a scene where one of the Ashaman gets stabbed, and another one is sort of there, and then gets killed by mysterious ways, which will probably be about Slayer, because apparently Slayer is back in the game. Going to maybe kill Rand or not. Who knows? We have the city. No one can use magic, so everyone has to use something else. Also, swords are also forbidden in that city, and everyone is in there. So I don't know what they're gonna do, like a punch out or whatever. Sounds like a cool setup though. I like that bit. It has potential, and he has. He has Min with him. He has Nynaeve and Lan with him, and this one freed Damani, whose name I've forgotten, Alvira, something like that. I'll remember the name at some point. So many names that start with L somewhere in this book. It's insane. Anyway, that one with him, and we'll see where this will be going in the near future. But Cadswain does more of their crappy Cadswain things and still gets away with it, which is she basically uses Alana as a tracking device to find Rand, and she also drags the sea folk people with her for some reason, plus a bunch of other people, travels to the same city and bullies her way around. And yeah, it still sucks. Because what we get at the end of the day is, and it's still the same thing. It's like, why do the sea folk people follow Cadswain? Where does she take that authority from? And I still have issues with that, because it's all about like her, I can just do all these things. It's very clear that she's sort of not the good one here, but also maybe still. And it's that weird inconsistency there, and the fact that she can just like go and slap Rand, and he's like, Why doesn't he just like punch her? She can't use magic in that place. He can't use magic in that place. He's a fucking blade master who's also like a karate king at this point because he's trained all that crap from what's her name, from the Aiel. Why isn't he just like punching her back? He's just like, I don't know. It's just that whole like that's still in a world where apparently the biggest things are either getting raped by a murderer or getting like cannibalized by by Trollocs, or being slapped by a woman are the the three biggest dangers in this world. And it still lacks certain, consistency, and all of it is ridiculous. Like having the whole like sexual aspect with the murderer as an open threat all the time, I think is creepy. It's very creepy, and the whole like Trollocs will eat you thing has become kind of ridiculous, a bit of like almost a comic thing at this point. And then there's like no scaling. After that, you'll just like get whipped in some way. It's always being spanked or whipped or slapped in the face. It has to be that form of punishment. Working gang? No way, sir. Being imprisoned? No way, sir. What you'll get is you'll get birched, or hit with a belt or anything like that. It's the only possible reaction to anything in these books is physical violence in the form of spanking. And yeah, I feel I should no longer talk about it because, yeah, why bother? We've done it so many times. It just keeps on happening, and it just doesn't make any more or further sense. I think what we still get, and I see sort of what he's trying to do, is that a large part of that we get through the perspective of one of the sea folk people, and we do the same stupid thing where it's like, oh, she's from a different culture and she will not understand anything. And it's sort of like, I get the idea that sometimes we know very little about different cultures, and that's fine. It's just that the way we're talking about people that have lived in Kyrian for months, and she's still like, I don't understand anything there. We also have a bit more of the shame that she apparently got into a lesbian relationship there for whatever reasons whatsoever, but now that's blackmail. That's a possible blackmail thing. And I don't like it. It's like if you have one lesbian relationship in this entire book and you make it all about this being like illegal, and not exactly illegal because in this world, homosexuality is illegal, because then you would actually have to talk about sexuality, which, we don't. But it's illegal because, of course, the one woman is in a heterosexual marriage and got, seduced by the other woman. And it's the cheating that's the problem. It's like, why? Why not show just like a happy lesbian relationship? Wouldn't that, be cool? We also get more on the, like, 4 people being bonded to Rand, and the problem that we have the conversation with Alana, which is sort of solid in a lot of ways, but we get, like, another emphasis that, of course, Rand is only with one woman at a time. He's not with all 3. He just like gets to pick and choose which one he gets to fuck, and that's all it is at the end of the day. So it's more of like a harem situation than anything else. And would he like want to like also add Alana to that? He could just do that as well, and that kind of makes the whole like bonding thing more like fucked up, I feel. Plus, obviously, the fact that those 3 Ashaman got kind of blackmailed by Cadsuane. So while making the whole bonding thing a more sexual thing over time, we still don't get like an actual judgment or anything for what doing it, doing it against consent or under duress seems to be still sort of okay if, the end justify the means. And yeah, we'll have to get back to that in the future, I guess. But right now, we need to talk about one final thing in that conversation with Alana. Because when Rand asks her, like, why don't you just like give up that bond? She's like, well, no. I mean, I would if I knew those other people would actually be able to handle you. And this is where we come to that weird thing that's going on there, which means that there's always a level of control involved in bonding, obviously. But when we look at like why Rand bonds, or like why Elaine, Avienda, and Min bond Rand, it's because of they want to be with him. Why they need to actually physically bond him as a warder, or put that magical bond on it, is obviously a question for another day. Because I always thought, just like, I don't know, start a fucking relationship. Why not? But yeah, and that's the points like that. The single male has to be, and I assume it goes the other way around for like the single woman as well. If they are strong, they need to be put into the bonds of a relationship, so we can all take care of each other in that specific way. And I don't know. At the end of the day, the problem with it is that these bonds are about control and like making the other person do what you want them to do and so forth, which ties back into how Robert Jordan seems to see relationships as a whole. Like, in that completely non-magical marriage between Perrin and Fael, it's all about them throwing shit at each other and yelling at each other and trying to make the other person do whatever they want to do. And I think it's like just like a very, very toxic viewpoint of relationships, that they are never about like actual, compromise, consent, and doing things together, or maybe even talking things out. But it's all about like, I want things to be this way. The other person is like, no. And then you figure out how you make the other person to do what you want them to do, and that's it. And that's sort of where this whole like water bond thing kind of comes in, because it just gives you like more magical leverage. And Rand, being the ultra male that he is, obviously needs all these women bonding him at the same time to kind of balance that out, because while he was only bonded by Alana, it just didn't work, because he just like basically took control of that bond, and suddenly it didn't work that way anymore. Yeah, I just find that highly problematic, or at least sad. I guess like one or two final bits and pieces still remain. Varen does more weird things, I guess, that go beyond her being Varen. But at this point, I'm just like waiting for her to come out as like Aja or whatever. But we'll see. But at this point, it has become something of a, once again, something of a trope. It's like Varen says something oh so unmindful, and she actually does it on purpose. And yeah, it has become so on the nose that I'm just like waiting for her to finally flip and become bad or whatever. We'll see. I guess what happens now is Rand will do more of these things. What I find interesting is we get the first information that whom we assume is Slayer is actually a split personality, or two people. One of them is Isan and one of them is Luke. Which one is which and what's the difference? I don't know, but apparently both of them like to go and kill people for other people. We'll just have to figure out more about that in the near future. What I find interesting is that we haven't heard of Perrin ever since like the beginning, so whatever's going down there, I guess we'll have to wait until the end of the book, or maybe the next one, who knows. And yeah, I just, as I said, like a lot of the more actiony bits and pieces here are actually fun. The way we get that perspective in Losing the Sun, that chapter about like from the Sea Folk perspective just didn't feel that convincing. But that's also because Robert Jordan still sucks at like describing any form of relationships. In this case, like the sister relationship between what's her name, Shalon, and the other one is Naria, Harima, something like that. Really not good with these names, but whatever. So I guess we'll get us a bit of like a death match between Rand and the remaining three um, rebellious Asherman. Three, probably three. Who knows? Three or four. And oh, it's only two remaining, right? The other one got killed by someone. I assume Padan Fane, because the way he was just like pierced slightly and then just like everything swelled with plague and he just died. It feels very much like that dagger from Shadar Logoth that Padan Fane has. So I assume he's in town because I mean he also wants to kill Rand. So I guess we will see where that is going in the next couple of chapters. I'll try to read them tomorrow. I hope I won't catch like super brutal fever from the COVID. We will see. Yeah, I hope y'all have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow, and yeah, cheers.